So we get up to Daf Pei Vav Amid Aleph, the beginning of Daf Pei Vav. Hani Tana Hamid Rav Sheshes. Omar Lo Rav Sheshes says Ani Shone Rabbi Shimon Omer Imotze Ish Gonev Nefesh Me Echav Ad Shiotzienu Mirshus Echav. So the way that Rav Sheshes had this brisa, if the sale after abduction was to one of the members of the family, one of the immediate members, then you're not chayav. Ata amrit chayav, but you have another brisa, and according to your brisa, if he sold, for example, after the abduction to his father or to one of his brothers, one of his relatives, he's chayav. And that's a mistake. It should say tni potter. You should really change the girsa, and he should be potter. So the Gemara asks the following question: My kusha dimya dilma, ha Rabbi Shimon ha Rabbanan. We have two shitas that are represented by the two brisos, and the brisa that says that you are potter, that's Rabbi Shimon, and the Rabbanan disagree with Rabbi Shimon, and they hold that even if he didn't take him out of the reshus of his brothers, he's still chayav. And the Gemara says, Lo sal kedai. The Omer of Yochanan, stam masnisin, etc., etc. And we're talking here about who authored the various sections of Torah Sheba'al Peh, whether it's the Tosefta, Stam Tosefta is Rabbi Nehemiah, or the Sifra, which is Stam Sifra is Rabbi Yehuda, Stam Sifri is Rabbi Shimon, but Vakula Liba de Rabbi Akiva. And all the above reflect the sheet of Rabbi Akiva. So we cannot interpret the brisa that says that if he sells it to his krovim, he is chayav, which is against the sheet of Reb Shimon, because this pasuk is in Sefer Dvarim, and therefore it belongs to the Sifri, and Stam Sifri is Rabbi Shimon. Okay, Agonav Espino. This is, I think, where we get up to. So we have a machlokes tanoim in a case of a father who abducts his own son. And the Rabbanan say you're potter in that case. My time at the Rabbanan, Rabbi Diyomer Kra, it says ki motze ish gonev nefesh me'echav, and prat lemotzu. Something tells me that we already did this Gemara, but okay, it'll be a chazor. So what happens over here? You need yimotze. And this is Matzui. So the son is already Matzui in the father's house, and therefore you're potter. So Rav Papa is going to ask a kash on Abaye. Omalei Rav Papa Abaye, Elamiyata. If the word yimotze means prat l'matzui, then let's look at the pasuk in the parsha of Iser Eishes Ish. It says, Ki motze ish l'shochevim ish abulas baal. Achinami should be consistent. And Ki motze prat l'motzui, kigon shel beis ploni, t'shchiach abayu. Like, let's say you have a number of different couples that live in the same house. That's already motzui. So if he has a relationship with another woman, so you're going to tell me that he's potter, achinami de petiri. Amalei, so Abaye defends himself against Rav Papa's attack. So when I excluded Matzui in the case of a Gonev Espino, that was from a different pasuk. It says v'nimtza biyado. And let's read the pasuk. The pasuk says v'gonev ishu mecharo v'nimtza biyado mos yumas. Now the v'nimtza biyado here in Shmos Perikaf Aleph is redundant. And therefore, we're going to darshan prat legonevis misha motzi etzel tomit. Omar Rava Hilkach Hani Mikri Dardaki. I think this is the last Gemara we learned. Is umasni Rabbanon So the Rabbanan are teaching these children, and they're under their jurisdiction, their surveillance, there's matzui, is kimitzuim b'yadam dami u'p'tira. Fine. Ganav misha chetzio eved chetzi ben chorin. We have machlokes tanoim. If he's chayiv, Rabbi Yehuda says he's chayiv, and the Chacham say he pot. Tanan hasa. So now we're quoting a Mishnah Bava Kama Pei Zayin with regard to chovel the eved Knani. So let's say Reuven owns an eved Knani, and Shimon was chovel the eved Knani. And for Chavol, you pay 5 different categories of Tashlumei Chavol. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ein Lavadim Boshes. And Eved Knani is not subject to Boshes. So a person is Mavayish Eved Knani is Potem Milashalim to make Boshta. My time with Rabbi Yehuda. How does Rabbi Yehuda derive this? Omar Kra, the pasuk says, "Ki yinotzu anoshim yachtov ish v'achiv." So the word achiv here means that he has yuchsin. V'mi sheyesh lo achva yotze eved she'ein lo achva. Rabbanan, whether Rabbanan who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, they hold that even if you're mavayish an eved, you're chayev, you have to pay dmei boshes. So how do they interpret the word v'achiv? Achiv hu b'mitzvahs. That since the eved has the status of kedushas Yisrael le'inyan, the same mitzvahs that a woman is obligated in, therefore we consider the eved to be included under achva. So the Gemara now asks a kasha on Rabbi Yehuda. V'hacha, in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says that if a person steals a chatzi eved chatzi ben chorin, he's chayav misa hechi darsh. How does he darsh in the pasuk in Parshas Gneva Goniv Nefesh? It says ki motze ish goniv nefesh me achiv mi bnei Yisrael. And the achiv has to have an exclusion of avodim. Rabbi Yehuda Sover me achiv lafuke avodim. So from the word achiv, which means yuchsin, we exclude avodim because ain't lo achva. And the Torah adds bnei Yisrael, because it says ki motze ish goniv nefesh me achiv mi bnei Yisrael. And that's another miyut. L'me'ute misha chetzio eved chetzio ben chorin. Now the word is not bnei Yisrael, but umi bnei Yisrael. So we also have an extra vav. Umi bnei Yisrael. L'me'ute misha chetzio eved chetzio ben chorin. So this is the principle of miyut achar miyut. So we have 2 psukim to darshan a miyut, and ein miyut el miyut el l'rabos. So even though Rabbi Yehuda darshans from echav a miyut to exclude avodim, but here we have another miyut, and therefore we apply the principle of ein miyut achar miyut el l'rabos, and therefore if he steals a chatzi eved chatzi ben chorin, he's chayav misa v'rabbanan, who hold that even in a case where you steal an chatzi eved chatzi ben chorin, you're patur. How do they dash in the pasuk? After all, it's miyut achar miyut l'rabos, and the Gemara says that the Rabbanon, with regard to the drasha of Rabbi Yehuda me'echav lafuki avodim lo mashmalahu lo achiv hu b'mitzvahs. So Adarabba, an eved is included under echav because he's chayav in mitzvahs ki isha. Now you have 2 other miyutim. You have bnei Yisrael and mi bnei Yisrael. Is chad lemute eved, v'chad lemute misha chetzio eved chetzi ben chorin. So it's not a case of ein miyut achar miyut el l'rabos, which is according to Rabbi Yehuda the case, but rather we have 2 different miyutim One we use for a limited novelty or chidush, that's eved, full-fledged eved. And then we have another to exclude chatzi eved, chatzi ben chorin, and therefore he's patur. Now we have a principle called Einon Shenelakei Masirin, as Hor Legoni Nefesh Minayin. How can we put the Goni Nefesh to death? We've got to find an Azhar in the Torah. Rabbi Yoshia Amar, according to Rabbi Yoshia, we derive the Isur Goni Nefesh Milos Lo Tignov. Right? In the Aseret Dibros, we have Lo Tignov. So even though Lo Tignov literally sounds like stealing money, but we interpret it according to Rabbi Yoshia as referring to stealing a human being, abducting a human being. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Milo Yimkuru Mimkeres Eved, that you shall not sell an Eved Ivri after the Yovel. V'lo pligi. Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yochanan don't disagree with each other. Mar kachashiv lav de genevu, mar kachashiv lav de mechira. I guess there are two parts to the chiyuv misa on a goniv nefesh. Has to steal, abduct him, and then sell him. So we have two different lavim. One lav that addresses the actual geneva, and another lav in the case, which always is the case, of mechira. Tana Rabbanon lo signov begoniv nefesh takosim medaber ta omer begoniv nefesh zo eino el begoniv mom. How do you know that the pasuk in the Aseret Dibros Lo Signov is referring to Goniv Nefashos? I can argue maybe it's referring to Goniv Mammon, Amrit. Say Ulamad Mishloshes Midosh Ator Nedreshes Man. And one of them is Dover Alomi Binyono. That means if the Torah says something stoma and it doesn't specify, then we derive from the parsha Shebetochu nichtav. So what does that mean? Right, we look at the parsha and the context of the pasuk, and it's minyono. And yono means the context of the pasuk. But me'akosu if you look at the immediate contiguous prohibition to lo signov, it says benefashos, and that's the case of lo sirtach, lo sinav, and he violates them. He's chayv misas bezdin. Afkan, so too in lo signov, benefashos. That's referring to nefashos where he steals a human being, because otherwise it violates the principle of davar lo mibinyano. Because the davar lo minyano here is a chiyuv misas bezdin. Tanya idach, we have another brayso. The pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim says lo signovu begoniv momen akosu medaber. Oh, so we assume that the pasuk in the Aseret Dibros of Geneva is referring to Genevas nefashos, and the pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim lo signovu is referring to goniv momen. Ata Omer, how do you know it's begoniv moment? No, Eino Ela begoniv nefashos. Amr Tzeu Lamad Mishlosh Shtei Midas Shatoran Dreshes Ben Davar Lamid Minyono. Once again, Davar Lamid Minyono. Mameh Kosam Mitaber. What is the Torah referring to in the contiguous context? The psukim there, but Mama, it says Lo Sasha Kesreyacha. Is Afkan here too? Lo Signovu is b'Mama. Okay, now we have a sugya of Hakchosh and Azom. So what's Eidim Zomim? The second pair of Eidim say, Manu Ayisam, you couldn't be with us to see, you couldn't be with the Rotzeach, let's say, to see the Ritzicha in New York because you were with us in Chicago. And now there's Hazam against the first pair of Eidim, and they are punished with the same punishment that they wanted to be Mechayiv the Nidon. Itmar Eidim Knev Eidim Mechira B'Nefesh. So we have two pairs of Eidim. We have Eidim that Ruvain abducted Shimon, And we have another pair of Eidim that Ruvain, after he abducted Shimon, he sold Shimon as an Eved. Shehuzmu. So I think Huzmu here in this context means that there was Hazam against both pairs of Eidim, against the Eidim that testified on the Geneva and against the Eidim that testified on the Mechira. Is Chisi Omar Ein Erogim, Rabbi Yochanan Omar Nerogim. Now, on the one hand, we can explain Rabbi Yochanan because these two pairs of Eidim are testifying that this guy is Chayav Misa. But on the other hand, Chizkiah makes more sense because each pair of Eidim is only testifying on a segment, not on a Chayav Misa. It's only part one, part two. Chizkiah, the Amar Karabi Akiva, the Amar Dover V'lo Chatzi Dover. In other words, according to Chizkiah, the reason why Ein Rogim is because each pair of Eidim here is testifying on a Chatzi Dover, and we don't accept Eidus on a Chatzi Dover, so there's no possibility of Hazama because the original Eidus was lacking and deficient. It was only a Chatzi Dover. So basically, there's no Chiyuv Misa, according to Chizkiah, unless you have one pair of Eidim who saw and testified about both the Geneva and the Mechira. But when they're split and the two different pairs of Eidim, one for Geneva and one in Mechira, there's no Chiyuv Misa on the Ganem. And therefore, hence, there's no Kasher Zoma. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Ki Rabbanan Di'amri Dover V'Chfilu Chatzi Dover. The Rabbanan rejected Rabbi Akiva, and we'll have to see in what context the Machlokas came about. And therefore, even the Eidei Gneva and the Eidei Mechira, even though they are interdependent in order to achieve a Chiv Misa, we accepted they're both pairs of Eidim, and therefore there's Hazama, then V'Asis Lo Kasher Zomam, and they will be put to death. So let's take a look here at the notes here, Lamed. Tigon, Kan begoniv nefesh, Kevin Shuchai Misa Rak al Knevis Nefesh Mechiri Yachad, fine. Now, Kevin Shabo Edim Rak al Knevas Nefesh, first pair of Edim, Bilal Mechirasa, and there's no Chiv Misa unless you have a Mechira. So the first pair of Eidim are totally dependent on the second pair of Eidim to complete the story in order to generate a Chiv Misa. And therefore, it's a Chatzi Dover situation, both in terms of the Eidei Kneva and in terms of the Eidei Mechira. Oh, so now he gives an analogy to a case of Eidus on Cheskas Karka. So in order to establish Chazak on a Karka, the Karka was known to belong to Ruvain, and now Shimon is squatting on the Karka. Shimon, if he wants to prove from his Chazak that he purchased the Karka from Ruvain, he's got to have 3 years of Achila. And let's say there were 2 Eidim that testified on the first year, 2 on the second, and 3 and a third on the third. That would be Chatzi Dover. Because there's not any single pair of Eidim that testifies on the Dover, meaning on the fact that he has a full-fledged Chazak, a valid Chazak. Now we want to take a look at footnote number Lamed Beis. He says, Gamim lo huzmu eina ganav nera. As we said before, we don't put the ganav to death because we don't have valid edus. The edus was a chatzi dover. So nimtza shelo heidu olav la miso. Uklalhu edus she'enat yachol azima lo shmei edus. This is a little bit confusing to me because I thought the edus cannot be accepted because it's a chatzi dover. He's saying the edus is disqualified because it's edus she'enat yachol azima. Oh, so I think my question is being raised here in the second half of the footnote, Lamed Beis, in the name of the Marshal. Why does Rashi have to explain that the Nidon is not put to death because it's Eidos Shiat Yochel Azima? Why not simply say that the Eidos is unacceptable because it's a Chatzi Dover? Let's see if he offers an answer. I don't see an answer here. Let's just see if we can come up with an answer. Maybe Rashi means the following, that it's not a chatzi dover vis-a-vis Mammon, because Eidos that Reuven stole Shimon's person, maybe there are different implications in Mammon that he has to pay damages or compensation. He prevented him from going to work or something like that. And the fact that he sold him on the market, that's another financial obligation to pay Boshes and who knows what else. But as far as the Chiv Misa for Gonev Nefesh, here we introduce the Chatzi Dover. And it doesn't mean that we didn't accept the Eidim because we accepted them for Mammon. But now, if we want to be Mazim them and make it Eidush HaTeichol Azim as far as Misa is concerned, for the Chiv Misa, that we can't do because it's a Chatzi Dover. Now he quotes a Tosfos here in Lamed Gimel. According to the Rabbanon, the Gemara apparently later on in Daf Tzadi has a drush l'gabi novi sheker shesnabe levatel chatzi mitzvah chelik min mitzvah, and he's parted from misa because it says ach novi hanovi yashayazid l'daber davar. Again, the davar indicates a full story. Bishmo, bishmi, es asher lo tzivisiv l'daber umeis hanovi ahu, and davar lo chatzi davar. According to the Rabbanon, Tosfos says that we don't darshan davar lo chatzi davar. So how do we explain that if a Navi wanted mivatal chelik me'am mitzvah, he's not put to death? It cannot be from the word davar, because in the case of edus on gnevas nefashos, the Rabbanan hold that even an edus on chatzi davar is considered like edus on a davar sholem. Therefore, we can mechayev the ede gneva misa, in the case of azom, or the ede mechira misa. Al kein pirshu atosas shigam lefi rabbana mashmos hamila dover hilamayit chatzi dover el shagabi edus al gonev nefesh im sovrim shigam edus al chelik me'am mikra nikreis dover shon. So there are two maisim hamachayvim. There's the Maisa Gneva and the Maisa Mechira. And therefore, the Rabbanan hold that the principle of Chatzi Dov doesn't apply because each one of these two Eidim testified on the entire Maisa. They saw what they had to see. But nevertheless, the Pasuk Dover excludes a Chatzi Dover. But not in this case because the Eidim saw the max. But in the case of Chazaka, where you need 3 years of Achilas Peros on the Karka of the Murakama, in that case, the Eidim didn't see the max. They didn't see the maximum because they only saw 1 year, which doesn't really amount to anything. You need 3 years. So in that case, where the Eidim only saw partially, even the Rabbanan would assume that Dover v'lo Chatzi Dover. I guess you're saying that the 3 years make up one Maisa Chazaka. So you need Eidus on that Maisa Chazaka. If you only have Eidus on part of that Chazaka, then even the Rabbanan would agree that Eidus has to be disqualified under the halacha of Dover lo Chatzi Dover. And in the case of a Navi, we're going to apply this drasha, this principle of Dover lo Chatzi Dover, and therefore if he was Mavatel Chelik Mitzvah, he's not put to death. Now, in a previous parak, the 9th parak, the Gemara darshins that the reason why the Torah wants to put a Ben Soru Mora to death is because Nidon al Shem Sofa. He's an addict and he'll kill in order to supply his drugs or whatever it is. And let's judge him now and put him to death as if he was Molaste Mesabrios, as if he killed the other people. Now, the Ben Soru Mor process is a twofold process. First, the father and the mother have to bring him in front of a Bezdin. And then, if after he was warned in Bezdin, he goes out and he steals basar and drinks and steals yayin, then he gets malchus. And now, if Adam testify that once again he stole, then he's put to death. Umoda chizkia v'edem achronim shel ben sor morer shehuzmu shenerogim. So you have Adam who testified on the first round that he was Zol V'Sovei after stealing money and so forth and so on. So he gets Malchus for that. Now you have a second pair of Edus that are testifying on the second round that he violates the Hasra. So in this case, even Chizkiah is going to concede that the last pair of Eidim will be subject to Hazama, even though they didn't testify in the entire story, the process that's made up of so many parts, but they testified on the part that would generate the Chiyuv Misa, meaning the clincher. Now, the last pair of Eidim have to stand on the shoulders of the first pair of Eidim. The first pair of Eidim testified on the first Geneva. And that's not enough to be Mechayev and Misa because we have to take him into Bezdin and warn him and so forth. But then he went out on a second round and again implemented Geneva. And then he becomes a Ben Sorumora. So the second Gneva is not called Chatzi Davar. And even according to Chizkiah, who says that there's no Azama, if they testify on a Chatzi Davar, here he would be Moda that it's considered a Davar Shalom, the second round of Gneva. So the Gemara explains, Lomar, Ha'edim, Harishonim, here we turn to Pei Vavam Beis, that Lal Koso Banu. Ani Achridi Kuli Davar Ka'avdile. So the Eidim who testify in the first round of Gneva right, they don't get Misa if they were Eidim Zomim because they only testified on the first Gneva, which means that he's Chayav Malchus. So even though the first pair of Eidim testifying in the first round of Gneva are basically setting up the stage and introducing the first shlav, which is ultimately going to be Mechayev, the Ben Sora Mora Misa, but nevertheless they have a right to say, our Zmama was to be Mechayev and Malchus. We weren't coming to testify that he should be Chayev Misa, but Hani Achrini, once we get to the second round of Gneva, is Kulei Dover Ka'avdile. Now, why can't the second pair of Eidim likewise say that we only came to testify that he's Chayav Malchus for Gneva? First pair of Eidim could say, I don't know that he's going to steal a second time around and be Chayav Misa. So this is what we want to find out here. What does it mean? Hani Achrini Kulei Dover Ka'avdile. Okay, so he quotes in number Aleph a Tosfos that says they don't have to actually claim that we came to be Mechayev Malchus, but we can assume that he's Chayav Malchus as a result of Reidus. Well, let's take a look at footnote number Beis and see if that would help clarify this Gemara. He says that each one of these two pairs of Eidim is dependent upon the other. So Rekiva and Chizkiah hold that this is a problem of Chatzi Dover. But here, the first pair of Eidim are not dependent upon the second pair of Eidim. Right? To be Mechayev someone Misa, you need both Gneva and Mechira. So the Eidim Gneva, so to speak, dependent upon the Eidim Mechira. But here, that in the first round that he stole money for Basar and Yayin, he's Chayav Malchus, so then there's a Chayav Malchus. That Eidus is not dependent upon the second pair of Eidus and the second round of Gneva. He says, "Valkein ashniya ena nechsheves lechelik merishona el rak ba lahosif aleh." Yidomador l'shnayim ameidim ki plonis hi eshes ruven ubo shnayim achem ve'idu shezintzem Shimon isha'af she'ein edus hakat ashniya maspika lahorgov lo rishona is Eini Nechsheves Lechatzi Dover, Kevin She'edim Rishonim Hame'idim Shi Eishes Ish, Einom Zkukim Lashniim L'Shnayim Achronim. Right. So what's he saying over here? Right, we're comparing two cases. There's Ben Soru Morer, which requires a double Gneva, and we have the case of Gneva and Mechira. And in both these cases, there's a double pair of edus. So in the case of, for example, Ben Soru Mori, you have edus on the first Gneva, and then a second pair of edus on the second Gneva. In the case of Gonev Nefesh, you have one pair of edim on the Gneva and another pair of edim on the Mechira. So I think he says the following, that since the first pair of edim in the case of Ben Soru Morer have an independent, complete edus with regard to the Chiv Malchus for Gneva, therefore it's not Chatzi Dover, it's a Dover Sholem. But in the case of Gonev Nefashos, it's not a Dover Sholem unless you have both the Gneva and the Mechira. They form one entity. And each edus, therefore, is a Chatzi Dover. Maskifla Rav Papa has a question on this understanding of Chizkiah. If Chizkiah is Modi, he concedes that the second pair of Eden in Ben Soru Mor is considered Dover Sholem. Is Eden Mechira Nami Liktale? Why mi tokshi cholam edi gneva lo al koso bonu? So this is interesting. You violate the law of lo signo by abducting a person, even though you didn't sell him. But that was the Gemara here on Pei Vavam and Aleph that established that in the case of Gonev Nefesh, he violates the Iser Lav, the Azhar of Lo Signo, which is in the Aseres HaDibros. So if the abductor, the Gonev Nefesh, violates the Lav Lo Signo, then he'll get Malchus for that. So it means now that, just like we said in the case of Ben Soru Moro who steals Yayin and so forth, that is a testimony that is on its own. It's an independent, complete testimony. So too, we could say that in Gonev Nefashos, the Edus on the Gneva is a complete Edus. And it stands on its own 2 feet. It's independent of Mechira because there's a violation of the law of Lo Signovu, and that generates Malchus. Oh, now how does that impact on the Edi Mechira? Oh, so just like in the case of Ben Soru Moro, once there was already an Edus on the first round of Kneva, the second pair of Edim are testifying on a Chiv Misa. In other words, the Ben Soru Morer, following the first Gneva, is in a jeopardy of a situation of going out and doing a second Gneva and being Chiv Misa. If the second pair of Edim testify on the second round of Gneva, then they're testifying on a Chiyuv Misa. And by analogy, the same thing applies in Gonid and Fashos. Once we already had Eidos on the Gneva, then the other pair of Eidim are testifying on a Chiyuv Misa when they testify that he sold the person. The Chitema, the Kasava Chizkia, the Lolaki. I'm not exactly sure, but the Gemara is raising the possibility that when you abduct a person, there's no chiyuv malchus for such a thing. Let's see if he explains it in number Dalet. Fine. Lava nitan lasharis misas bezdin. Now that's important. But I have to know who can disagree with this. So we're saying now that the gneva of a human being does not generate malchus, even though it's a violation of the lava lo signovu, and that's because it's a lava nitan lasaris misas bezdin. So there's no malchus. So now the Gemara is raising the possibility that the second pair of Eidim that testify on the Mechira are totally dependent on the first pair of Eidim. There was no Malchus that came from the first pair of Eidim that would set up a complete Davar such that the Eidim Mechira are independent of the Eidim Gneva, and they're testifying on the Mechira, which is the clincher for the Chiyuv Misa. But the problem is that according to Chizkiah, it's a lav anitan lasaris visas bezin, so there's no chiyuv malchus. So the Gemara rejects this by Itmar Eidei Gneva ben Nefesh Shehuzmu Rabbi Yochanan the Chizkiah. There's machlokes about this between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan. Chad Amar Lokin, Chad Amar Ein Lokin. The Amrina, that this time, this Chizkiah, the Amar Lokin. Mida Amar Chizkiah Ein Nerogim. Okay, I think we're going to have to do this last part again, even though I wanted to complete the sugya. Let's just make a note of where we get up to here. And let's see, tomorrow, what's tomorrow? Tomorrow's Monday. Not sure what my schedule is tomorrow. I'm supposed to hear from someone about an appointment. It's probably not going to happen. So assuming that we go tomorrow, Karagil, if there's any change, I'll let you know. So we have the shir at 9:35. That will be on Lulav HaGazul. And then I'm supposed to teach that Zoom shir at 11 o'clock. So we'll try to see if we can fit in a little bit of Sanhedrin before that Zoom shir at 11 o'clock. Okay, then? All right. Wishing you a great day. Thank you so much.